Well, welcome to another in our Let's Talk Leadership live conversations. And it's got a real USA flavor to it this afternoon because we're ringing at a time when two of our colleagues can actually join us from the States. So I'm delighted that Lena Mateza has been able to join us again from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. So Lena, great to see you. And someone that both Ian and I have known for a long time, and first met when we were working with, well, before we were working with the Center of Creative Leadership, and that's Al Calarco, who's joining us from Greensboro, North Carolina. So Al, great to see you, and thanks for joining us. As usual, if you've got any questions, if you want to join in on the conversations, we're live, so join us on LinkedIn, have that conversation with us, put questions in the chat, and we'll do what we can to try and respond to them. Britt may be joining us a little bit later. But we're going to get started and just see where the conversation goes. Now, Lena is spending a lot of time with young people who are on the MBA programs at the University of Wisconsin. She's also been talking to us before we came on air just about the future of work and how the gender inequality plays out in that. Al has been recently working for Habitat for Humanity and also for the Gates program on international leadership in public health. So there's lots and lots what we're going to have a go at. Ian and I will do our best to keep up with the conversation and contribute where we can. And as I say, let's just get started and see where we get to. So Lena, you said something just now about the gender situation. So say a little bit more about that to get us started.
Well, there's been lots of data coming out. I was just pulling up, I won't bore you by citing statistics, but McKinsey put out a report just a few months ago in 2020 called Women in the Workplace. If you haven't read it, you want to search on it. You want to search for that. You want to read it. It is disturbing is the best that I can say. For those of us, I've been in the marketplace for over 25 years. As from a gender perspective, we are very excited about the gains that we've made in the workplace in terms of the leadership roles that we've been able to achieve, the kinds of mentoring that we've been able to reach back and do for young women coming into the workforce. And what we found happened with the pandemic is it sent women back home because we had to make a choice. We had to make a choice between our families and literally the lives of our families and our extended families and our work life. And we were the ones in the family that got sent back home. Yeah. And we did that as a matter, right? It becomes a matter of survival of the species versus advancement of the species. Yeah. And we chose survival.
Yeah. And what have you seen? How has that played out with the younger women that you're working with, particularly thinking about the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So in the MBA program that I have the privilege of directing, we have people from 21 to 61 in our program. And when I think about the women that are from 35 to 21, and by the way, we're half women in our program, we've reached parity. We're really excited about that. And I'd love to say reasons why I think we reached parity. Because it means you have to put women in your marketing materials. You have to tell women's stories so that they see themselves in the program. But what do I think they're facing? I see a lot of exhaustion, right? A lot of exhaustion. Again, another great article came out. I think it was a New York Times article about 2 months ago. Most of the women in my life were talking about it. It talks about the cognitive load that women carry when we are the CEO of the home, as well as running our parts of the business that we're running in the marketplace, right? What this yields is exhaustion. And so I see a lot of women struggling with their identity, wondering about their marriages and their partnerships, wanting to care for their children, but missing the part of themselves they have to give up to do that. Stressed out because their brand and their identity is not what they want it to be. Imagine you're doing primary childcare and you're on Zoom calls all day. You know, your kids are coming in constantly. You just worked for a decade to cultivate a brand and identity. And now the marketplace is seeing you as a totally different person.
Yeah.
So think about you've all been in this place. You've all been stretched too thin. For me, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing lots of women who are ambitious in many directions at once, who are stretched far too thin.
Yeah. And Al, you've been working with all these leaders recently right across Africa with the Gates Foundation. So what are some of the things that you've noticed?
You know, Lena, I would just reinforce something I think Lena's hinting at. I don't think people are working from home. I actually think they're living in their work. They're living in their job.
Yes, yes.
And I think for a while we said, okay, everyone work from home, whatever that meant. And I think we assumed it would be this virtual space that we would go to, work a couple of hours a day, kind of take care of the spouse or partner and the kids, you know, whatever else had to happen, we'd figure it out. Well, now we're in month 16, right?
Yeah.
So I'm getting emails from colleagues at all hours of the day and night. And so the idea of what a workday looks like, and then the ability to get work done within the framing of that day, I think people are pretty much living in their jobs. That most of my work recently has been with healthcare workers who talk about working all day on this COVID issue, whatever the bigger frame is you want to put COVID in, and then having to go home and manage a family and kids and sick parents and access to vaccines. And, you know, we sit in a pretty privileged spot in that we actually have people in the United States who are choosing whether they could want to take the vaccine or not. And I'm working with healthcare workers who have yet to have their first shot. So I think we have to remember we have this incredibly privileged position that we're in with COVID, even though it's a challenge here working with these healthcare workers. And Lena, I was thinking too, you know, I was chatting with one of my family members who lost 2 summer internships back to back.
Yes.
So these both female, actually,
Yep.
They talked about, you know, that between their 3rd year in university and 4th year, and then their 4th year and after that, this was going to be the 6 months of really good work experience and potential job opportunity that were both erased. And I think the young people I know working at universities don't seem to me they're getting quite the same experience as probably we got. Working with peers, being on teams and groups, and working on group projects. I think they're working a lot in isolation, and I think there's a ripple effect for all of that. Lena, I think your comments about, you know, the CEO of everything, that's what, and our Gates program, interestingly, Lena, you'll appreciate this, are more women than men, which is very exciting. And then talking about the whole role of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ian and I've chatted about this, about recruitment of diversity, but also retention of diversity. So what are organizations going to do in the future once they've acquired a more diverse workforce? How are they going to change what they're doing to be able to retain a diverse workforce? Alina, I was just recently reading that 90% of the people surveyed in this survey by Deloitte said that they expect to work at least 1 day a week at home.
Yeah,
90%.
Yeah.
And then Lena, one more point. 80% said more than 1 day a week at home.
Yes. Yeah. And so we started by talking about the future of work, and I'd love to know what you gentlemen think about this. I was recently at a meeting with many of the executives in our area, and they were talking about culture, but they were talking about using culture to try to lure people past these statistics that Allan is laying out for us. Because what we find is employers are having a hard time getting people back to their desks. Yeah. And I think the stats are even saying right now they'd rather quit than come back.
Yeah,
100%, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we're in this interesting space. All of us work with organizations. All of us work with individuals across the whole age range, but definitely young people. What does it look like to help them find a meeting of the minds around culture, right? Because I see executives saying our culture is the culture we used to have, and I hear young people saying, no, we've already moved to the culture we want to have.
Yeah. And Lena, you think about even the people going into an office for the first time in 16, 17 months, I was chatting with a good friend recently, works for a large international corporation, and they've done town meetings of groups of 300 and 400 people to kind of set the agenda for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And they asked the question of the men and women participating, saying, what are you looking forward to most in returning to work, right? We're returning to the office. And you all know this, they did a word cloud, a Wordle, So the more often mentioned, the bigger the word appears. And the largest the word on the screen was nothing.
Oh.
Nothing. And so I was thinking, as we work with people, I think even in my own little world, in my, as we like to say, my 1 square kilometer, my 1 square mile, even going back to my office in the same building on the same hallway would be different. And what I think supervisors and managers and leaders have to do is probably reset the whole stage. And even going back to basic Tuckman of, forming and norming and storming and allowing people kind of this time to get back to what it means to get back to working again in a structure. And then the last thought I had about it was, it's one thing, Ian and Matthew are independents and they run their own little worlds and their own little fiefdoms. But imagine if you had a big physical plant, if your organization owns, 100,000 square meters of physical space.
Mm-hmm.
And now 3/4 of the people are saying they don't want to go back to an office anymore. What do you do with all of this physical space? How do organizations financially build a model to sustain that and keep enormous properties, heated, air conditioned, whatever it is? So I'm thinking only about if you walk down a hall and 2/3 of the people are gone, you have to really question what you're going to do with physical space as well as people.
Well, it's interesting you raised that particular point, because there's a client that we're working for at the moment who's a very large American client, who said as far as their operations in a part of Europe are concerned, they're reducing their office space by about 50-60%. They're just getting out of the leases they've got because they recognize that way of working is no longer they don't know what the future is, but they know that it's not going back to that. And I did some face-to-face work this week for the first time in quite a while.
Yeah.
I struggled. I mean, this sounds crazy. I struggled to remember what to put in my overnight bag in terms of what I would need, even down to, hold on a moment. I'm sure I've got a little plug connection here that my MacBook Pro to connect with the data projector. Where are the pens? Where are the Post-it notes? I mean, it sounds funny. I was struggling to think of all the stuff that I did automatically for years without thinking about it. And here I am in a situation, and I'm in an office. I hope I'm still reasonably intelligent and not too female. And I was really struggling to think of all the things I needed to take with me, to the point where at the end I had to lay them all out on the office floor and sort of almost tick them off like a packing list.
Well,
Get it? And I thought, if this is what it takes me in my little kilometer world, heaven knows what it's like for a large organization.
Right. And the people. So, okay, good. So the future of work is all about new routines, right?
Yeah.
And disrupted routines and new routines. And so we've got this spectrum. We've got organizational leaders who are like, let's just get back to our routine, right? Because why are they like that? Because revenue's predictable when we understand the routine. I heard this about AI the other day. It's great. It said analytics is in trouble if the future isn't predictable. If we've had such a change that we can't predict, and predictive analytics, right? And how much is running on predictive analytics right now? It's in trouble. Because, but that's what CEOs want. That's what these C-suite and boards of directors want. The reason that they want to get back to the old routines is the old routines produces predictable revenue, predictable sources of income. And then, but wait, Al mentioned this, right? So we've got this predictability and routines. Al said, but look, the young people, they're not even getting to develop the routines we got. I'm not even sure they're getting any value.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, too, Lena, this company I mentioned with this friend who works at a large international company, they had the greatest year on record last year. Any way you measure it, financially, politically, physically, growth of production, whatever you want to measure it by, they had the most successful, and they fully, like most companies, expected to take a major hit because of COVID. So all of these people working at home had the most productive year on record, that's again, look at you know that there are people sitting in a room saying, no, that can't be true. That can't.
But it is.
It's not sustainable. I mean, that was an anomaly.
Yeah,
right. But it's true. I remember talking to Phil Wilburn. He's a network guru, and he was talking about the fact he won't mind me mentioning, I'm sure, he went to a lunch the first time with his team in a long time. They had 2 hours together. And he thought afterwards, how inefficient was this? I could have got so much work done in those 2 hours. But that's interesting because, of course, you need that social time. But isn't it, Lena, also a chance to innovate when you need to think about new habits? So look at the co-working spaces. There's a big brand that we all know of. It's been a tough year for them, right? But if you think about co-working spaces, not in the bigger cities, but maybe in your local communities, that could be a big driver. My niece, when she's studying for her finance exams, she would go to the library because she wants to be around people, but not necessarily working with them. So we're drawn to other people, maybe, and that, Lena, may give us some more boundaries around home and not having to be the CEO of everything, particularly for young women who may be trapped in those habits and those cycles, just to break free of some of those things without going back to the workplace, which was the office of that big corporation. There must be a chance to innovate, and I hope our young leaders are going to teach us what that needs to look like, because we're the wrong audience maybe to ask about those things. We can make it happen, but it shouldn't be our decision. So what do the younger leaders, the younger teams, what do they actually need to maintain productivity which is sustainable? Because it's not.
I love what you just said, Ian. In just a few hours, I will be meeting at a local co-working space with one of my MBA students. And this co-working space is really ahead of things. So it's a nonprofit organization called Create Portage County. They've just won about a $500,000 grant to extend this notion of what they've set up called an idea center, which is a low-cost local space where people can construct the new office for themselves, right? Whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and can you imagine how that would work if lots of people from different organizations, whether they be commercial companies, not-for-profits, local government organizations, were all milling about, going and coming into a center like that, meeting each other, having small subgroup meetings to discuss the stuff while they're there, but also then rubbing shoulders. I mean, it would almost be like a very pleasant airport terminal building with people coming in and going out, landing, having a cup of coffee, seeing someone they know and having a chat, getting on with some work, and then going back to wherever they had come from, rather than this sort of edifices of large offices and everything structured on different floors, and there are protocols about who can work on which floor and why, and who gets the corner window and all of that nonsense. I just think there's, and the other thing that's happening is that we've all noticed that the most recent generation are not people who want to work permanently for one organization or even have a career path. They're quite happy to work in something that's a bit sexy and interesting for them for a couple of years and then move on to something else. Well, that also plays against this idea that we can go back to a culture that pre-existed the pandemic. Yeah. It was starting to change anyway, and it's certainly not going to go back.
Well, let me throw a word bomb out here. All right. Yeah. So what if, right? So we've had movies that have said it's not all about money, right? But the word bomb I want to throw out, it's not about that. It's about how we construct value. What is value? So we have a professor who's teaching, just a cutting edge, people-centered economic development course for us. It's one of our core courses. And Professor Greg Wright, one of the things that he challenges our students is the social construct of money, when what they really want, and what we see in young people, and maybe you all are seeing this, is they want value. That value comes in many different streams.
Well, then all of us ought to be reading Mark Carney's book on value, the previous governor of the Bank of England, who's now working for I think it's for the World Bank or UN or whatever. But his whole first chapter, I've started reading it, is on value and how value was originally based on the produce from an acre of land. Whatever could be grown, it was agriculturally based.
Yeah.
And as a whole, it's fascinating because I knew nothing of this. And then all of Adam Smith and Ricardo and all the other people who came in, and how value has become totally distorted over time and has led to a lot of situations that aren't healthy for the future of the planet, the future of us as a society. It's a tough book to read, but a fascinating one. And value is at the heart of it.
Well, and Matthew, the first question we ask people is, what do you do?
Yeah.
So we're placing value. We put them in a value bucket based upon whether you're, like our friend Ian is an engineer, and that's really impressive, right? Versus other people, we put them in. Yeah, that's a shout out to Ian. Let me put a couple other layers here. Lena would know this, being on a faculty hallway when we work together. There are spontaneous moments for innovation. You can be talking to a colleague, and I can remember at least 3 times where speaking to a colleague simplified something I needed to do. And instead of having to go find it sort of in the catacombs, and finding out where the bodies are buried, by a simple chat with a colleague, I realized I had no idea that was even available. So there's a spontaneity of innovation that I think people will have to figure out. And then the other bit is, we have to figure out who gets to work from home, right? Yeah. And when you think about the traditional organizational structure, the big, heavy organizational structure, it's usually the people at the upper end of the food chain who make all the decisions, who say, well, you can't work from home, but I can. And they usually touch themselves when they do that. And they have all the power in the relationship. And so Lena's talking about these new people coming into the workforce who want more flexibility, quite frankly, and more time maybe with family or spouse or partner, whatever. That's what they would value. And we're thinking giving them more money is what makes them happier, or giving them a title, or giving them a corner office, quite frankly. Yeah.
That's right. So think about this. What if, and Ian was saying this before, I think, in a roundabout way. What if the old mindset that organizations extract value from people, what if people are saying, actually, I'm going to take control of the value extraction. I'll be extracting my own value, and I may barter with you for a certain period of time when it's interesting or exciting or valuable to me.
Yeah.
Lena, I have the answer. I've been working on this. I haven't told you, Matthew, but I've figured it all out. Okay. The age of the employee is dead. No longer. Think how much money we'd save in employment tribunals if we didn't have the employee concept. And I know it's existing already as a gig economy, but what if you're right, Lena? What if the power is in the hand of the service provider, which is the person? Because in the future, we'll be fighting with robots and artificial intelligent beings as well. So we've got to raise our game a little bit. But what if we no longer had employment as a concept? We provided our goods and our services as a resource to organizations. And I think the younger people are more willing to be more of an agent of service and work through organizations that can maybe match them with their purpose that they believe in, where they can add value to something which is greener, more sustainable. Wouldn't that be cool? I know it won't work. I'm not that crazy, but maybe it would. Maybe for some people, and it's not the gig economy as we know at the moment, because all the risk have to be managed. Okay, but wouldn't it be cool if people actually could make those choices, and it wouldn't be that you'd be bidding and the highest bidder gets the service from the individuals, but there's some level of negotiation and engagement there, just a different model, and maybe that could help in certain situations. Who knows?
Well, let me really throw a curveball then. There's a lovely guy that I've been working with, not recently, called Liam Hennigan. He works for a client, and he was the sort of head of investor relations and relationships. And he was asked to think of a future. And one of the concepts he came up with was this idea of, why is it that these vast tech companies own data that is actually provided by us? Why couldn't we have a model where our data, our health records, our spend records on credit cards, are things that we're interested in because we click on them on a website and look at them. If that's got a value to it, then isn't it about time that we took back control of the data that we have, our data, our blood pressure, you know, our diet, our nutrition, whatever it might be, and actually people pay us for it if they want to use it. This whole, I think we could be at a point where if the younger people that we're talking about really start to say, no, we're not doing stuff in the way that it's always done. You know, the whole conversations have started to kick off about binary, non-binary. It's got traction. You know, all of the various other movements have happened in the last 2 or 3 years as a result of tragic events. The way the climate change discussion has got serious at long last, but still has a long way to go. It just makes you wonder whether actually there are lots and lots of things that we really do need to reset in society, and the younger generation, they're in a wonderful position to be able to do that.
Well, let's go back to Allan, and I really want to. I loved what he asked us a question, and we're all so excited about this topic. We went by it really fast, and he said he arose the image of the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
And so, Matthew, I'm going to tie you and Allan together, and I'm going to say, what if our intervention isn't with the haves? You know, all 4 of us work with the haves. That's our bread and butter.
Yeah.
But what if it's with the have-nots? And so in this survey that I mentioned from McKinsey that looked at women, minority women, particularly Black women, out of all of the survey base, were least likely to feel supported. And what if this is a time when all of the talent that the 4 of us and our colleagues have been developing over time, what if it's now our time to go into underserved populations that aren't supported, to bring this refined talent and to support them doing this? Right. Ian said, I've got the answer, and then he backed way off. Right. but what if this is our time to be crazy with people?
Well, yeah, and Lena, you know, the other thing I'm thinking of is tying all of that together is this, you know, during this tough time, I wonder how many people had a conversation with their boss where it went something like this: I don't want you to leave. Versus, we have to downsize. So please get with your team and figure out what that looks like. But how many people actually had a conversation with somebody where they looked them in the eye and said, you know, it's going to be a tough year, 15 months, 18 months. I just want to be clear. I want you to stay, and let's figure that out. And that, you know, when we start to reopen, as we are here now, let's hope the right people left and the right people stayed. Because there was no measure of that. Organizations just said, we have to tidy up the Excel sheet. We got to deal with our margins. We got to downsize or right size the organization. But as Lena is suggesting, did the right people say to the right people, but you're not that person. We want you to stay because you bring a perspective that we'll need a year from now, or I find the old joke used to be there: people make your day when they walk in the room, and people make your day when they walk out of the room. Did you keep the right people? So not only are you going back to figure out what the culture is, Lena, do you have the right people to get back who are going to try to figure all of that out? Because I know great people who decided to retire early.
Yeah,
like. Just yesterday in Facebook, 2 friends in higher education who I consider to be like Mount Rushmore level people in higher education. You'd put them on the Mount Rushmore of higher education. Both early have decided to retire.
Yeah.
And I think there's not only been an economic toll on us during this time, there's been a physical and a mental toll and a relationship toll and all of those things. So in going back to organizations, are you gonna put the org chart up and say, oh my God, the wrong people left?
It's a massive reorientation about what I care about. And I don't
Yeah.
know that organizations are winning the right hearts and minds, right? Are they winning the hearts and minds they need for the future? Or are those the very people that can do what Ian's suggesting?
Yeah.
And you know, just going back to this element of focusing on the have-nots rather than the haves. In a very small way, Ian and I and Britt and everyone who's involved with Let's Talk Leadership are doing that in terms of supporting at the moment 12 young leaders around the world. And when you hear the stories of the young leaders that we're supporting in India, who are working in the charity sector, who right through the recent awful scenes we've seen in India, have been supporting teams out in the field, delivering basic services, in one case to, I think it's like 175,000 people living in rural areas. You know, and yet at the same time, we can be in a queue in a supermarket here in the UK complaining because our type of pasta isn't on the shelves at the moment, or we can't get our special tonic water for our gin, as Ian would say. It absolutely puts into perspective the enormous divide, whether it's gender, whether it's opportunity, diversity, everything, and a huge divide between haves and have-not. And I don't know whether it's the same in other parts of the world, but certainly in the UK, the richer have got incredibly rich.
Yeah.
Not necessarily at the detriment of others, but have just got, you know, it's been a very good pandemic for a lot of people, and it's been an awful pandemic for most people.
Well, they're announcing the billionaire approach to going to outer space. You know, Branson and Bezos are fighting to see who gets there first, and I'm thinking, why is that even important? So in working with, it's a very interesting perspective, Matthew, because in working with another CCL colleague who was working with me with this nonprofit, she said to me, I'm so touched by how appreciative they are of our time, that they feel so honored and special to be part of this group. And she was really touched by just how much they appreciate anything we were doing for them, versus this sort of privileged group who gets to do the leadership thing all the time and go to all the conferences, who probably gets a little tired of them and maybe doesn't appreciate it as much anymore. And this person who we were working with in Africa said, you know, I tend to be a half glass, half full kind of person. She said, I've saved wear and tear on me this year because I'm not traveling as much. I've saved money because I'm not paying to fly places to deal with my territory. I feel safer at home. I feel like I've saved some of me for my family. And I began to think, wow, that's the opportunity instead of the negative, right? Oh my God, I don't have the right, whatever the right is. But holy cow, I've saved wear and tear. I've been able to spend more time with my kids. I'm doing more from home and getting a lot done. And she fundamentally shifted the whole conversation in the little group by saying there's opportunity. And I think this is what Lena was hinting at too. There's opportunity in here for us to maybe do something in a different kind of way. And although the pandemic has forced us to do a lot of things, it may have forced us to have to think differently about the way in which we work and live, and work. So,
and reduced us to a place, right? I think there's been a lot of reduction going on, right? You turn down the noise, you turn down the trouble, reduced us to a place and raised enough fear in us about our lives and our families' lives and the lives of the people we care about, that don't you think more people are saying, what do I care about?
Yeah,
what
exactly.
is worth me?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm going to say it differently. I know for sure organizations can't win in that space the way they used to.
Yeah.
That's the future of work.
Yeah.
Organizations have to find a new way to win in that space.
Yeah. And, you know, Lena, and you're dealing with this too. In the US, the tremendous debt that is being accumulated by young people just wanting to get an education. I mean, I was always envious of when I lived in Europe, of the ability for the government or states to support education. And here, you know, I see people racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and wondering why they're doing that, and now trying to figure out how they're going to pay it back. But there's a ripple effect of that, and it delays home ownership. It delays maybe a nice vacation that you would want or need. Delays a lot of things. It delays probably relationships and marriages, and so
I think we have a responsibility to right pricing.
Yeah.
So we did that in our region when we launched this MBA, because we built it from the ground up in 2019 when we launched. I got a chance to do the research on it in 2015, come back in 2018 and launch this thing. So we are a research-based, evidence-based design, a different kind of MBA. And people say that about us all the time. Well, one of the things we did is we right priced for our region, because we want our students to have reward in their careers. We want them to have reward in their finances. We want them to have rewards personally in their connections, right? Personally, professionally, and financially rewarding. They can't have financial reward if the pricing of the degree is too high. So we're a public university, and we could do that. We could right price it. So we haven't underpriced it, but I can tell you that we're seeing the return now. And I've been very hesitant. I never make a financial promise, but I am now seeing that financial promise. We're in a rural community, right? We're in the center of the state of Wisconsin. We're the central Wisconsin region. We don't have a lot of industries and a lot of employers. It's not like when I grew up in Chicago and I could get promoted every 12 to 18 months for the first 10 years of my career, because there was that kind of room in organizations. There's just not that room here, right? And so we were, again, very hesitant. I've got people who a lot of people who've had mid-career promotions. Okay, so what we want to see is that we want to see a quick doubling of the investment. Now, why can we think this way? We're a school of business, but I'm a business person. Right? And so you can bring those models. And this is what I think organizations have to think of. When I got back and we started leading and designing this program, we put up experience maps. And we said, what experience do we want the student to have? Right? So we're going from the experiences from prospect till they get to contributing alumni, right? Engaged alumni. And then we drew out the experiences of our faculty and of our partners in the community and our partners in the institution. And we went about designing an experience that was rewarding for everyone. We thought about what reward was. How many employers are doing that? That is the future of work. And again, now we're back to value.
And you've also, I mean, one of the things, and Ian knows this with the universities here, we're getting a backlash now at the universities because the students, albeit not having to borrow as much money as you would in the US, are still having to borrow substantial sums of money. They're going back to their university and saying, well, why should we pay you our fees when all you've done is deliver online programs that could have downloaded off Google or wherever else? And you know, my great niece battled to get into medical school and she has spent the whole of her first year at medical school locked up in a hall of residence, having online lessons because 2 or 3 of her colleagues went down with COVID and the whole place was put in lockdown. Her experience of a young woman starting her adult life in a university is radically different to Ian's or mine or yours.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty certain she's going to come out saying, why I'm not, you know, given what I've now experienced, why should I put up with what happened? People coming back from the First World War, having fought in the trenches, said, why should we go back to pre-1914 norms in society? The same thing happened after the Second World War. You know, women came back into the workplace and said, we've been running the munitions plants for the last 5 years. We've been growing the food that's fed half of Europe. We're not going to stand for being pushed around any longer as a sort of second-class citizen. There has got to be some seismic changes taking place.
So reduce that to lessons, Matthew. I love that you talked about those larger social cycles. I know you're on the spot, but you try to pull 1 or 2 lessons out of those larger cycles of coming back and people saying, no, we're not going to stand for that now. What does that mean for right now?
Well, after the Second World War, 2 things, certainly in the UK, 2 things happened, regardless of your political viewpoint. One, there was an acknowledgement that healthcare had to be universal. There had to be a massive change in the way that people were looked after in terms of their health. And the other thing that happened was that there was a massive program of social building. So there was an enormous amount of housing that was built across the country. Now, whether you agree or not agree with the politics behind it, that was radically different to what had happened pre-war. I think more recently, I would argue that we went through a culture in this country of everyone stand on their own feet. And, you know, this stupid notion that everyone is equal, therefore you have equal opportunity, therefore those who get to the top are clever and those who don't aren't. That is changing. That, I think, I'm looking at Ian, but I think there is a bit of a shift to say that sort of model is just irrelevant now. It's not about, you know, it's not about just about opportunity. It's about making sure that people are starting from the same point at the beginning, and they're still not. So I think there's an opportunity for people with some really collaborative, interesting, radical ideas to have a look at society generally, and also look at organizations that we've been talking about and say, hey, there needs to be something done here. We need to rethink everything, which is really where we started this conversation. Because that's what both of you were saying, that there are things here that the future of work is going to be very different to what it was 2 years ago.
So Ian, getting back to your your idea that you've got it, but you pulled back, build on what Matthew said. What are we, if we're going to make these changes, if it's going to be radical, what does it have to be?
One of my fears is that we, as we head back to offices around the world, and in a couple of weeks, I think in the UK, that's going to be much more likely. We delayed slightly our last phase of our coming out of this from a pandemic restriction point of view. But imagine a manager, whoever they are, saying something like, well, you know, people can't just expect to enjoy the same freedoms they did during the pandemic. And, you know, can you imagine somebody saying that, saying, sorry, freedoms? Can you imagine somebody saying, because they thought they were free to work where they wanted, when they wanted, and I'm thinking, and you thought that was freedom?
Yeah.
I mean, what that was you being forced to trust them to work, as I would call it, in the Martini way, anytime, any place, anywhere. Alan knows what I'm talking about here. But in the workplace, when you go back, it has to be, no, it was never freedom. What you're now going to have to do as a leader, if this was a true little story, was you're going to have to trust people to do the right thing. Ian, we're going to have to take risks.
Can we just know Ian does own the brand to his upcoming book, The Martini.
The Martini is the answer to everything.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Looking forward to that. I see it as a little, yes, a little coffee table book. Every other page has a really nice shot of a martini, and then the metaphor carries through.
Shaken, not stirred, obviously. But
well, this one, this might be relevant. A friend wrote this book. It's called "Stupid Things I Won't Do When I Get Old," and it's a terrific read. But it might be stupid things I'm not going to do when I get back to the office.
Totally.
Right? I don't have to be there at 8 o'clock.
No.
Right? Because so I was thinking this example. I was on a call with a younger colleague a few days ago. This person said to me, "Oh, I've already told my boss I'm not coming back to the office." And I was like, "What? Wait, there's something wrong with it. Isn't your boss supposed to tell you what you?" That's a mindset, right? That's a mindset. Or where's the conversation about what new work is going to be like versus one person telling the other person what they will and what they won't do? Where's the chat? And I think what if I was supervising people right now, I would be worried that there is no real FaceTime with people I work with anymore. So I might have a team of 50 people, 17 people, and I've not really spent any time one-on-one with them since this whole thing began, where we have an honest conversation about where are you and where am I, and where's the organization. And so I was thinking about it when I was reading Stephen's book about stupid things I won't do when I get old. I was like, stupid things I won't do when my team comes back, or when I interact with my boss, or when I'm asked to do something that I probably have thought differently about in the last 15 or 16 months. Before I forget, one way to think about it is I would encourage everybody, with whatever decisions they're making about who comes back or doesn't come back, or whether there's a staff development fund or whatever it is, who does this benefit and who does it burden?
Yeah.
Right? And if they can keep in mind, and that this goes back to the long history of diversity work and inclusion and diversity work, is HR policies. Who do they benefit and who do they burden? And you think of a simple HR policy that existed, that if you were married under the laws of the state, you got time off for your wedding. Well, who didn't get that? A whole bunch of people who didn't qualify for that that benefit. And people were getting weeks off for weddings, and there was a whole population that would never enjoy that. And it wasn't because of something they were doing, it was something because of the institutional burdens of equity and inclusion that were not in part of their HR policies. So if you just go and ask people, if you ask somebody in your time over the last 15 months, how did you benefit as a leader? And then what were the burdens you experienced? I think you'd have a rich conversation with people about what they're looking forward to and what they don't think they want to do anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I love that, Allan. So Allan he narrated the rule change. That organizational leaders are going to be mystified by, because the rules changed and they don't know yet.
Yeah.
Because the employees are starting the conversations. We're not waiting anymore. This is, we now take, right? And this is to Ian's point. The hashtag now is, you think that's freedom? Hashtag you ain't seen freedom yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Be afraid. Be very afraid. And I think the future of work is not a rule-based approach, because the system rules will always win. And as humans, we're going to struggle to overcome those systems. But maybe principles are the way to go. So things like you talk about integrity and things. So do the right thing, and then define what that means. Have a conversation now about it.
Yeah.
Always deliver for the customers. Be there for each other, whatever the principles are going to be, because then you can write some policies, some procedures where you need to around it, but it doesn't have to be rules that don't serve anybody anymore. We have to throw them out, but put something else in place, something more that's appropriate for the future of work.
The issue is, if you think of the simple examples of working from home pre-pandemic, it was a privilege to a very narrow group of people. And that supervisors were consumed with treating people equally. So if you're at a certain level in the organization, no matter what happens, you get the same privileges. But from an equity model, what I would think about is I might have to look at the 10 people who work for me, and I might have 10 different relationships.
Yeah.
And that.
No, say that again. Say that again, Al. What did you just say?
Yeah, so I used to be consumed, when I was a supervisor, I was consumed with being sure everybody felt they were treated the same. And I'm just not consumed by that anymore. And I think you look at what's somebody's distinctive competency, what's their brand in the organization, and they might get an opportunity that somebody else doesn't get. And then this person might get an opportunity that they wouldn't get, and that I would be working with them individually to figure out how they fit now in this new, whatever. I don't like the phrase new normal. It just irritates me. And it's so overused. It's so overused. But what I would say is I'd be consumed with, I think if I was leading a team right now, I'd be consumed with keeping the right people. It'd be my obsession to be sure that the right people who are doing great work know that I appreciate that, and I want them with us on this journey. And I was thinking, the sad part is these, most of the executive teams who are making decisions about coming back to the office, those are being made in isolation with this small group of people who already have the most power in the organization to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
And are they asking, the lowest levels of the food chain, so what are you making of coming back to work? Right? What does that look like for you? Or are they sitting sort of in their little silos saying, well, we know best. We have collectively 288 years of experience. How could we get this wrong? Yeah.
We're drawing a couple conclusions. One, I think one thing that Al is really advocating for, tell me if you'd say this differently, but conversations is a crucial currency for leading.
Yeah.
Right? It becomes more crucial than ever before, those conversations. I'm going to go back to Ian, because Ian's been talking about power in ways that none of us have, we don't even get what's really going on here, right? I think when we look at what Matthew said about ages, you know, periods of time where something new comes to the fore and it changes culturally, I think this is what's changing. I think power is what's changing. I've been, Paulo Freire has been in my brain, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? And one of the things that he says in the very beginning of that book that has been in my brain every day recently is that it is not the powerful who change the system, it is the oppressed. They are the only part of the system that has the ability to change the system. And so what if we aren't even on the real topic yet? Because what if what Matthew is saying is this is a new age of equality? And I loved that, and I have a swear word around it, Matthew, I'm not going to use it, but that horrible corruption of equality that you mentioned before, right? We're all equal, so it's whoever grabs the brass ring, that's who deserves the power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what if we're in a new age of that, and the powerful should be really scared because the oppressed are coming?
And yeah, I think too, the other thing too, Lena, is that this is a generation that isn't quite sure anything before 20 years ago is as important as today. Yeah.
Say more about that.
Well, you know, I remember growing up and my mom or my uncle would talk about World War II. And I would say something like, God, that was so long ago, you know, let it go. And now I hear young people saying, yeah, I don't care that didn't happen in 1991. Or it did. And, you know, this isn't 1991. And so I'm hearing them say the same thing I said to my mom, you know, 40 years ago. And now I'm angry that they're saying it. Like, what do you mean my history doesn't matter? Well, my history matters, so does yours. All these histories matter. And so I think whoever, you know, university presidents, you know, the average tenure for a university president is 4 or 5 years. I wouldn't want to be a university president in the United States, bringing people back to a physical space this fall and trying to figure out what a university is going to look like in 2021. I think CEOs have the same challenge. What is the future of the physical space we work in, and what's the future of the emotional space we work in, and how do we serve our clients and pay attention to the important things when I'm not going to bump into you at lunch? Right?
What's the future of the value space we work in?
Yeah. And how do I learn what my value is within the context of that? What do I bring to? Then that goes back to the conversation with the boss. You know, does the boss look at me and say, no, you need to stay. We want you to stay. Or does the boss say, well, you know, that's a good opportunity, so you might want to take advantage of it. Yeah.
And we had a conversation, I think not the last one, the one before, with Rafi Aldina from Frost Included. And one of the recommendations he made, because we were talking about how do you, it's not so much the diversity piece, but how do you genuinely include people and find out more about how they see the world. And he suggested this idea of partnering, where you reach out to someone who is very, very different to you in all sorts of ways, and you decide that. And then you hold each other account, you hold each other's sort of coat, if you like. So when you're in situations where where you're observing your partner, you're able to call out when that partner is to be excluded from something, or whether something has been said that diminishes their sort of person. And likewise, you do it for your partner. So you have this process. And it struck me that maybe some of the senior people in organizations, based on what we've been talking about, ought to reach out to someone in a totally different part of an organization with a totally different perspective and start having those conversations. You know, what is it like for you? What is important to you? What are your values? And what do we need to do differently if we're going to continue to attract you working for us? How can we, you know, there's something about that. I think the conversational piece is huge. Absolutely.
And what if we need to drop down into our vulnerabilities in that conversation?
Yeah.
Right? The four of us, right? So if the oppressed are coming for the powerful, right, we have to open up the places we've been othered so that we can connect with the others. So the conversations have to change. They're not power over conversations. I think they're power with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, you know, and little things too, the intentional and unintentional messages that, you know, CEOs are talking about being transparent, but are they really being transparent during this pandemic? Or are they doing everything kind of with this small, tight group of people, hoping that by osmosis, the information flows out to the rest of the organization? Yeah. You know, Matthew, I was just thinking this because I have a CEO who's going to do executive benchmarks. And one of the feedback potentials is peers. And I was chatting with him and I said to him, I said, well, don't you know other CEOs? And he said, I've never thought about asking feedback from people who have my job, who've seen me work. And so we were I was just chatting with him about, isn't that an opportunity for you in industry and out of industry? So as maybe Lena's suggesting, if I work in the profit space, go after somebody who works in the nonprofit space and see what the tensions might be for you there. So he said, I can name a half a dozen people I've worked with over the years who are CEO peers. Oh my God, that would be so valuable.
Mm.
And I said, and particularly not so much the ratings of the competencies and the items, but in those open-ended questions about what do you do best and what do you need to work on? Imagine the insights they could give you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time. We could go on chatting like this all day. It would be wonderful. But I think we perhaps ought to draw it to a conclusion. We've been going probably longer than we've gone on any conversation, which is fantastic. So I hope people have been listening to it. Lena, Al, thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful. And as we always say, and I say, you know, please come back for more of this, because I think it's not only is it interesting, I hope, but it's also valuable in terms of the comments and the ideas and the thoughts you have. It's been super. And Lena, thanks for joining us at 8 o'clock in the morning your time. Al, 9 o'clock your time. Thanks for that.
Who knew 9 o'clock happened twice in a day, right?
and you know, yeah, come back and have more conversations with us. It's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It was good to see you, Lena.
It was great to see you.
Matthew, Ian, always fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.